skeptic Michael Shermer is almost qualified to do conspiracy science. The community of skeptics poses valid but old arguments about religion without getting too much into the empires that have always controlled organized religion. And they debunk esoteric bunk without tracing the origin, like the Theosophics back to the British Empire. They warn people of quack medicine, but they never apply the same critical thinking to the medical cartel. And they talk about lousy and amateurish conspiracy theories without ever following it up with conspiracy science. Now, Michael Shermer was just on the Joe Rogan podcast again to rattle off his usual arguments how conspiracy theories try to explain a complex world with simplistic concepts. Now, you can, of course, listen to the entire podcast. We've linked to it in our story on eng.recenter.com, or you just find those clips, the excerpt where he talks about conspiracy theories. All right, so complex world, simplistic conspiracy theories. Now, that is true for amateurish conspiracy theories, but ask an FBI investigator how complex organized crime gets and how ingenious organized crime gets. How many people are involved and how many offshore shell companies and crooked lawyers are involved who can pull 100 different stunts. How hard it is to build a case against organized crime. So professional criminals hide behind complexity. Or you can go ahead and ask a French lawyer about complexity whose young Muslim client has been framed by intelligence with terrorism or support of terrorism. Now, that lawyer will tell you that the paperwork is too much to even read within 3 months, let alone counter its contents, and a lot of the files will be secret. Or you can ask the CIA how complex foreign intelligence operations are. You know, ask an FBI person who works in counterintelligence how complex it is to counter Russian intelligence operations. I mean, we have the Russiagate scandal going on. The Mueller investigation about collusion, and we've seen a lot of people already going to prison for various things. We've been commenting on this. Now the best possible evidence most likely cannot be used in public because it would reveal sources and secret sources and methods. Then cases like 9/11 or the JFK murder produced several millions of pages each, and people are still scratching their heads. Complexity is like a form of encryption. An encryption algorithm needs to be as complex as possible to prevent being broken by brute calculating force or clever mathematical attacks. So, you want a real scientist looking at the intelligence surrounding 9/11 instead of some amateur interpreting TV footage. Well, then read the books by Nafeez Mossadegh Ahmed. This guy is serious. He's a real scientist, and his work, first book, has been used in the official 9/11, the official 9/11 commission. I think they even invited him, and he probed, and he was digging around, and then they kind of put the lid on this thing. And then he wrote a second book detailing more and more and more stuff relating to intelligence during 9/11, before 9/11. So, Michael Shermer and all the skeptics and folks, why don't you take a look at the work of Nafeez Mossadegh Ahmed? Why don't you go into this whole intelligence thing instead of just going the easy way and debunking stuff that is about 9/11 that is easy to debunk? Or, if you want to research every participant of last year's Bilderberg conference, that will take you weeks to do a halfway proper job. Talk about complexity. Now, going through US government records about critical technology sales to the Soviet Union, that took Anthony Sutton, a real scientist, his whole career, and he didn't even get to write his book on China before he died. So, focus on the core questions. Okay, so the core question is not the question, do 12 guys that call themselves the Illuminati run the world from London? You know, this is stuff that Shermer mentions. The question is not, does the Bilderberg group run the world? Okay, that is not the core question. The core question is this. Is the Anglo-American and Western European realm covertly run by organized psychopaths, criminal, malignant narcissists using standard and advanced intelligence techniques? That is the core question. Now, we can safely assume that the Russian superpower and the Chinese superpower are run by organized psychopaths and malignant narcissists. I don't think that's a long argument to be had. If you look at the Chinese communists and you look at the Russian regime, I think it's pretty clear. These systems are run by organized psychopaths and malignant narcissists. So, what is Shermer actually trained in? What is his professional background? He is trained in Christian theology, history, and experimental psychology. So, he should at least know about psychopaths and malignant narcissists. He should know that the British Empire, for example, killed 30 million people in the India colony just for the heck of it. And if you want to know more about the British Empire, I can direct you to the book of Shashi Tharoor, who is also a serious person. And Skeptic Shermer should know the British Empire was run by a family cluster of Hannover, Hessen-Kassel, and others who also built modern Freemasonry sort of as a sideline quasi-aristocracy because society was getting more complex and larger, so you needed a second type of unofficial aristocracy, handing out privileges but also demanding something in return, loyalty and information, and towing the general line. And the British Empire pretty much defined modern intelligence. Now, if Mr. Shermer spends the time to read maybe 100 quality books on intelligence and organized crime and connects these intentionally separated sciences, he would not just be qualified to debunk bad conspiracy theories, but he would be qualified to do actual conspiracy science. So it's not good enough to just complain about a lack of science concerning conspiracies. You have to follow that up. You should follow that up with actual science about conspiracies, or call it something else. Call it organized crime of the highest order, or call it the secrets of the superpowers, especially our Western superpower. Because the two Eastern superpowers are openly dictatorships. There is one ideology in China that everybody must follow, that nobody's allowed to criticize. Everybody must love the ideology, or at least shut up and not complain. And that's a very old school type of tyranny. And in Russia, it's sort of a right-wing dictatorship right now, or at least it's posing as right-wing. But still, there's one party ruling Russia, and a bunch of oligarchs, and you can't criticize them, you can't criticize the system, or the system will hurt you or even crush you. Very old school. Okay, so that kind of a dictatorship is what we saw in the old times in the West. You had a monarchy, you had an open aristocracy, openly ruling. But this system had severe flaws. Everybody in the citizenship knew whom to blame for the high taxes and the wars and anything else and the lack of freedom. Everybody knew the king. It was the king's fault and the queen's fault and these families' fault. And so societies got larger and more complex, and people demanded rights, and they demanded new systems of government, and they wanted to try new things. So the Western elites, the Western kings and aristocrats, they devised this new kind of hidden dictatorship, this hidden rule, using standard intelligence techniques, using front corporations, using front organizations of a different kind, using middlemen in the form of politicians or CEOs. It's very simplistic. It's not that it's not rocket science, but it does get very complex because you have an empire to run, and we know the British Empire was vast and very complex. But human desires, especially when you talk about psychopaths and malignant narcissists, human desires tend to be very, very simplistic. So, it's difficult to prove that, or almost impossible to prove that the Western system, the Western nations, their democracies, their capitalist systems, it's very hard, if not impossible, to prove that these Western systems today are legit. So you have to be at least aware of different scenarios. Well, it could be that there is hidden control using standard intelligence techniques, you know. At least you have to be aware of another scenario, or more than one scenario. It's not just black and white. It's not just either the mainstream view or ridiculous conspiracy theories. Now, of course, the United States dominates today. Britain dominates. Their puppet states are part of it. So did the British Empire really disappear? Has this old system of control really disappeared? Is it crazy to look for a different answer? But of course, that has to be done in a professional way. And conspiracy media, traditional conspiracy media, over the last 200, 300 years, hasn't really done a proper job. It hasn't really been scientific, because there is no place you can go to really learn about conspiracies in a scientific way. You can go to university and enter a course on conspiracy matters. There is no such university. So who is actually qualified to judge conspiracies? How do you get qualified? As I said, Shermer has a scientific background, right? But he's not been very critical of established circles. And I'm not saying he's part of a conspiracy. I'm just saying he hasn't been very critical of anything that's really, really powerful. Now, he's mentioning things that have already been mentioned in the public press, right? He talks about the Panama Papers. Oh, see, there's a real conspiracy. The Panama Papers. Billionaires not paying their taxes. Oh, look, there's a real conspiracy. Well, yeah, sure, but the Panama Papers were really complex. You know, it took a bunch of journalists over a year just to go through all that data. And let's not forget who basically wrote the book on hiding money and hiding true ownership. the British Empire. Okay, so you had like the history of British East India Corporation, and this blurring of the lines. Is it government? Is it private? Is it legit? Is it legal? Deliberate blurring of the lines. And so if you look at and professionally study the monarchies and aristocracies, you will find a huge cluster of families. It's not just the Windsor family that you see on television. No, it's a huge cluster of families. And there's a lot to indicate that these families, these powerful families, that they had a high level of professional skills relating to intelligence matters. So you see people from Hessen-Kassel and Hessen-Darmstadt, these families, you see them involved in secret societies and influencing certain things, creating modern Freemasonry, ultimately creating modern intelligence, but we're all supposed to just focus on amateurish conspiracy theories that are easy to debunk. So, if you join the FBI, they will background check you, to make sure you're not crazy or a criminal or part of some conspiracy, right? That you don't try to infiltrate the FBI, the bureau. And so then you get a training that is decent, right, to track foreign spy operations, to track organized crime, these sort of conspiracies. So you do get a solid training, but you don't get the training to judge the real big stuff, especially real big stuff concerning your own government. Now, with the Mueller investigation and Russiagate scandal, you see that the FBI can go to these very high up people, President of the United States, President's associates, and so on and so forth. But the best evidence won't be used in public. Even if some smoking guns are found, they will likely never be used in a public trial. And it's also possible that Donald Trump once had some sort of an agreement with Western intelligence before embarking on these Russia deals or, probing Russian investments and traveling there and whatnot. That is something that nobody's talking about except me. There's a possibility he's had an agreement. Trump had an agreement with Western intelligence because so much Russian money flows out of Russia and is put into these Western banks. And of course, Western intelligence will look at these flows of money, will look at these Russians. And if Trump brings in Russians to his condos, to his Trump Tower, if wealthy, powerful Russians buy real estate in America, that's something of interest for Western intelligence. So maybe there was a side deal. But that's the sort of thing that is way too high for the average FBI person. And even if Trump gets removed from office, even if Trump hypothetically steps down as president, the empire will go on. Trump may serve another term. It's not really important to the empire. The empire was there before him. The empire will go on. Lots of powerful families in the United States, lots of corporations. These families, they've been there for hundreds of years. And they will be there in the future too. Doesn't matter who's in the White House. If Hillary Clinton collected $1 billion, for her campaign or whatever, it doesn't really decide the fate of the United States empire or this whole Anglo-American empire. So even if you join the FBI, even if you become a professional FBI agent, you won't get the training to understand, truly understand the largest types of conspiracies, or let's say the largest types of intelligence operations. Now, if you join the CIA as a normal person without a powerful family background, you will likely end up as a mere collector of data or an analyst of data, and you will be limited to certain tasks and operations and fields. You will be spending your time on a certain topic, and you won't get to see the big picture, because that's how intelligence agencies are set up. And we know the CIA goes back to a secret society called Skull and Bones, and that of course goes back to the British Empire. And those are facts, not my opinion. And so even if you join the CIA, you won't actually get the training to understand the largest types of conspiracies or intelligence operations. Not even at the CIA do you get the qualification. So, if you get a history degree, usually you don't learn anything relevant about intelligence agencies. Intelligence work, I've read a lot of history books. I maintain a public list of what I have read, real actual literature. And I keep updating this list, and I divide it into categories so I can see where I'm lacking, where I need to study more. And I've split up the literature into different fields that are important to what I do. So it's history, it's intelligence books, it's psychological books, and it's books on criminology, organized crime, everything that's useful. So I have to improvise. I have to combine things, combine scientific knowledge and combine different fields, because there is no university I can go to that will offer me a course that combines all these different fields. I have to do it myself. And everybody else can do this if they make an effort, or they can at least try to be good at it. But it takes time. I've read about roughly 500 books, 500 quality books, and that's not even including quality articles or studies or military handbooks or whatever. So that takes time. That takes an effort. You don't get paid for learning. So Michael Shermer is not really qualified to judge conspiracies, because he's lacking that intelligence knowledge. I don't expect him to get another PhD. I would hope he gets 30 or 50 or more quality books on intelligence matters and criminology. I've read a lot of history books that are excellent collection of facts, but they don't really tell me the history, because they do not mention this whole level of intelligence. It's like they're trying to tell you the history without the intelligence side of it, the intelligence aspect of it. And only if you factor in intelligence can you get closer and closer to the actual truth, or you can approximate what happened. You can get the most accurate estimates according to the available facts and logic. So Shermer is only qualified to debunk bad quality conspiracy theories, and there's a whole nother level to this. Okay, so starting with the first best-selling conspiracy book, a long time ago, John Robinson's Proofs of a Conspiracy. Now, that book created international waves. It got a lot of attention. It even, I think, reached George Washington. And this sort of became the basis of modern conspiracy media. But there was a huge problem with that book. Even though that book doesn't really tell false things, even though this book uses information that was public at the time, police documents regarding Weishaupt's order of the Bavarian order of the Illuminati. Now, it is known by now that the concept of this conspiracy book, the concept came from a British agent, Mr. Horn, and he was sort of a go-between hanging around the family of Thurn and Taxis, a very important, powerful family here in Germany. And the author, John Robison, was a British Freemason, a known scientist, and he professes his love for the king, the Hanover line of British kings. He confesses love for the king, for British Freemasonry, and he only blames French lodges and German lodges, such as the Bavarian Illuminati, only blames those organizations for meddling in French affairs, namely the French Revolution. And Robison never actually looks into British suspects. He never looks into British intelligence, how the British throne had the clear motive to meddle in French affairs, to destroy the competition, the French monarchy. So, there's an obvious conflict of interest. You know, he was a British subject. He was loyal to the king, and he was drawing attention to French lodges, and he was drawing the attention towards a already busted German lodge. And he never talked about British intelligence, which is ridiculous. So, and a British agent provided the concept for this book. So the obvious suspicion arises that this book, this first modern conspiracy bestseller book, wasn't a simple intelligence propaganda operation, simple, basic psychological warfare to draw attention away from British intelligence. And that sort of thing happened again and again and again in modern conspiracy media. So you had authors like Mr. Carr, books like Pawns in the Game. He worked for the British Empire. And his book is full of false information and misleading information, always drawing the attention away from the British Empire and drawing the attention towards some mythical Jewish world conspiracy. And then you had the Protocols of Zion, which was a forgery done by Russian intelligence, and the Russian leadership at the time was closely related to the British throne. And these Protocols of Zion were then picked up by influential British circles and influential American circles, and these lies were then repeated, and spread around, and spread around, and spread around. And then you had Nesta Webster. She was kind of a star in conspiracy media, many decades ago. And Nesta Webster was literally born into British establishment, and she got free advertisement for her garbage from none other than Winston Churchill. And you see historical evidence, right? Shermer has a degree in history, so he should be able to find this information. There are quite a few historical examples where European kings used a few Jewish middlemen to force bad loans onto the rest of aristocracy, for example. And this was done, of course, to deflect anger. You know, it's to divert the anger away from the king towards these few Jewish and also non-Jewish middlemen. And of course, then you saw in European history, a lot of instances where kings who were low on cash, they would usually rob the Jewish community, expel the Jewish community, then invite them back to rob them again in the near future. And you've also seen in the 1300s and the 1400s, you saw these European kings, these European monarchs, you saw them spreading around anti-Semitic cliches and anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. And so at some point when societies became more complex, the European monarchs, especially the British monarchs, the Hanover line, they experimented with democracy or guided, secretly controlled democracy. They also experimented with secretly guided capitalism using standard, simple intelligence methods. And so that experiment worked. And it was possible to create this impression of a complex society where you can't really pinpoint who has what kind of amount of power, who can order around whom. The world became seemingly so complex that the average citizen didn't really understand it anymore. So the citizen was now allowed to and encouraged to get mad and speak and have opinions and ideologies and try out ideologies and such. And you could choose between hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of politicians who were also constantly changing. And this sort of fake complexity was a way to hide true power. And this whole idea of this whole myth and this whole fairy tale of a supposed Jewish world conspiracy, that fairy tale was not just spread around like crazy by Russian intelligence and British intelligence and American intelligence, but this fairy tale largely hinges on or largely depends on fake documents such as the Protocols of Zion, and it also largely depends on this idea that 5 little banking brothers, the Rothschilds, that these 5 little banking brothers essentially stole the British Empire unhindered, unmolested, even though historical facts tell us that the Rothschilds were the puppets of Hessen-Kassel, to be specific. Hessen-Kassel built, and the British throne then officially, built the Rothschild family in their careers. And there existed a vast number of control mechanisms to ensure this would not backfire. So first of all, the monarchy and the aristocracy, they controlled the police, the armed forces, the justice system. So you had all kinds of control, making sure your puppets would obey you. And then you had intelligence. You could always spy on your puppets, make sure they behave. Then, of course, you had the option of secret contracts regarding ownership and decision-making of companies, such as banking companies. It was easy to have hidden contracts where the monarch would be the true owner, and the monarch had the bearer bonds tucked away in a safe box. It was very easy to do, and your puppets would constantly require the signature of the monarch and his trusted family members. We would always require the monarch's signature for any important deal. Now, conspiracy media, traditional conspiracy media, has always disregarded these facts and these standard methods of intelligence and control. Classic conspiracy media has mostly just regurgitated older material, and this happened as well in the internet age. So a lot of things you can see on the web can be traced back directly and indirectly to classic conspiracy books. And so, yeah, it's not just a lack of science in traditional conspiracy media. There's also some really suspicious influence and dirty influence over it. And that is something people need to be aware of. Now, of course, especially in the internet age, if you correct false information, if you correct false information, especially about this Jewish world conspiracy, if you actually apply science, and if you disagree with what people believe, of course, you will automatically get attacked. You know, people will say you're a Jewish agent or you're working for the Jewish world conspiracy. And then there's people who believe in the reptilian master conspiracy, and if you disagree with that, they accuse you of being a reptilian. And there's people that believe the Vatican is behind it all, and they don't even know the terrible quality of the source material, and they don't even bother to actually take the time and look at 2,000 years of history of the Roman Catholic Church and the interactions with the French empires, and it's very, very complicated and very interesting. And of course, you have to be very, very, very critical about that. But if you question this simplistic view that the Vatican is behind it all, if you question that, these believers out there will accuse you of being a Vatican agent. So no real science, no real thinking. It's very black and white. So, yeah, Mr. Shermer not really qualified yet to judge conspiracies or to do actual conspiracy science. But it's an interesting debate, and it's interesting that Joe Rogan tries to have a broad view on things. You know, he is interested in secret things. You know, he was intrigued by the old Alex Jones, and when Jones was more fact-based, and when a lot of people got inspired by Jones. But at the same time, Rogan criticizes a lack of equality in conspiracy media and a lack of science. So what's the answer to that? Do more science, or do actual science, right? If you're not good at doing pull-ups, what do you need to do? You need to do more pull-ups. All right, so I hope this was informative, and I've done my own research, and people in the English-speaking world don't know me that well, but I've been around German alternative or German independent media for roughly 15 years. I've also been a guest a few times on the Alex Jones show when Paul Watson was hosting. So I've been around. Okay, so I've been around. I've put in a lot of work, and I know my stuff. You know, and people know where I live, and I run my own retail store too. Okay, so I'll be translating one or more of my books. I will translate it into English in the near future, so you can actually look at a lot more research regarding the power structures of the last 300 years. And it's not just the Anglo-American realm. It overlaps with the Russian realm and the Chinese realm, right? There's a lot of very interesting common history. You know, we got to that point where we only have 3 superpowers left. 3 empires that really matter, and everybody else is just a client state or not really that powerful. And do you think this was possible? This concentration of power, do you think that was possible without some serious intelligence work, hidden control over complex societies? Well, that's enough for this video. I hope you find it interesting, and please comment down below. Please write me a message, visit us on Patreon, support us on Patreon, and subscribe to this channel.